Right, good morning. Good morning and welcome to Bible Study Live. Colin Points here, and I'm the pastor of Winslow Christian Fellowship, and I've come to show you what I normally do during a weekday when I'm preparing for my sermon on Sunday, preparing to preach. So this is what we're looking at today. It's Mark chapter 6 verse 14 to 29, and I'll start by reading the passage. I think everything's coming through loud and clear and you can see me, so that's good. You can live chat. The live chat's available, and ask questions if you want to. So Mark chapter 6 verse 14 to 29. King Herod heard of it. Let's just go back and read verses before that. Oh yeah, so he sent out the 12 in twos to cast out demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. Right, verse 14. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said, he is Elijah, and others said, he is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother, Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. For when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he vowed to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, for what should I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And she came in immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests he did not want to break his word to her. And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, and brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. So this is about Jesus' identity. That's where we start. King Herod, it's a sudden stepping out of the narrative, really, isn't it? A step out of the narrative. To look at King Herod and what he thinks of Jesus specifically, who he thinks Jesus is. This then leads to a flashback where we learn about what happened with John the Baptist what happened between Herod and John the Baptist. He's very brief, is Mark. He doesn't give a lot of the details that other accounts give. But it gives you the basic story. But there's going to be missing certain details, isn't it? And so you've got this character who, he's the king, Herod, but he's well, who have we got? Let's who? King Herod, who's a kind of wouldn't normally have become the king, if it wasn't for the Romans. They installed him because he obeyed them. I think he might have been some minor relative in the royal family. But he's got power. He's kind of in charge. The Romans expect him to keep order, keep people behaving. Who's there? King Herod. Jesus is there. People, some said, that is groups of people who have different opinions about Jesus's identity. Some people think John the Baptist, some people think Elijah. So we've got Jesus is there, we've got John the Baptist, already dead at this point, and we'll find out how. It's been raised from, that's why these Elijah, major prophet from a long time ago. Hundreds of years before. The prophets of old. General, yeah, presumably lesser prophets than Elijah. He was a major significant Old Testament figure, and lesser prophets one of the prophets of old, lesser ones. When Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised, for it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, wife of Herod's brother Philip, Herod's brother, his brother Philip, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Presumably Philip was dead, or was he just exiled, put in prison or something? Where is Philip at this point? He had married her, yes. John had been saying to Herod, not lawful for you to marry your brother's wife. So Herodias had a grudge against him, wanted him put to death, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. It's a fascinating dynamic, that. Fearing, confused, being perplexed by him, and yet wanting to hear more. Knowing there's something going on in what John teaches. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for Herod's nobles, Herod's military commanders, the leading men of Galilee. So, yeah, you got these three groups of people at the party. Herodias' daughter, presumably by Philip, otherwise it would say Herod's daughter. Herodias' daughter danced, and she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, his guests, well, we've already seen who his guests are, those three groups. Ask me for anything up to half my kingdom. I wonder how old she is, girl. Young person of either sex. Female child, birth. It's a girl. Corazon of a presumed a maiden, a little girl, damsel, maid. So she's young. Corazon. Girl, little girl. Flipping it. Sorry. Not really thought, but young. Wonder how young. If he's calling her a little girl. It doesn't say it was a sexual dance, but it's often portrayed that way. This could be really horrible. This could go down a really horrible path. The more you dig into this, you could discover that there's something going on that is really gut-churning. Anyway, I'm still looking at who's who. Whatever you ask me, I'll give you for up to half my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, For what should I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And she came in immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her. And immediately the king sent an executioner. The king's executioner, whose job it is to cut off the head, bring John's head, and he went and beheaded him in prison, and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples, John's disciples, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. I assume it's John's disciples. I'm pretty sure it's in another passage, in another version, another Bible. There's another one of the Gospels. It talks about the John the Baptist's disciples, as opposed to the disciples of Jesus. So I think that's probably everybody in there. That's quite a cast list. Come back to the daughter and how old she is a bit later, shall we? Yeah, what's the best thing to do? Is start off by doing a sentence diagram, or having gone through and looked at the people. Let's look at it verse by verse. Look at verse 1. So King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Verse 14, yeah. Jesus' reputation has been spreading, and people have travelled far to see and hear him, but now his reputation has reached... You're looking in the wrong place at the moment, aren't you? Sorry about that. High places. Yeah, so and the question that is often being discussed, and therefore Herod seems interested in, is the question of Jesus's identity. That's an important question in Mark's Gospel. Who is Jesus? It's going to come to a head in a couple of chapters. For the disciples. When they're put on the spot and Peter answers the question. But now we've got this sort of teaser. And it's looking at one of Mark's central questions through the filter, or through the eyes of Herod. Particularly because I can't spell particularly, can I? Because people were saying that he is John the Baptist. And we find out in this passage why that suggestion has particular resonance for Herod. If people are saying, oh, John the Baptist been raised, the thought that John was alive scared Herod, because he knew that what happened was appalling. Yeah. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. It's the miraculous powers that really made people ask the question. Otherwise they'd have been happy that Jesus was just some Galilean who taught some good things. The miracles are signposts pointing to who Jesus is. But the question is, well, what exactly are they pointing to? No one is quite sure yet what they're pointing to. Okay. Elijah Re Incarnated is another possible candidate. This is a likely candidate because there is a prophecy in the Old Testament, Malachi, that Elijah would return. I suppose the confusing things is that the fact of Elijah's return that people are expecting, that's what John was really, John the Baptist. He was like the new Elijah. Not reincarnated, but just doing the things that Elijah did, fulfilling the function. But people are here talking about Jesus being Elijah. John the Baptist was an Elijah-like person, even though he wasn't a reincarnation, but he fulfilled the prophecy well enough. Jesus being one of the lesser prophets could make sense. Why can't people think in terms of Jesus being someone new? Why does he have to be a person from the Old Testament, reincarnated? Is that a thing? Reincarnation, is that something that the Jews had, that they believed in? Did the Jews believe in reincarnation? Why do they keep thinking in terms of people from old? Why couldn't they just believe that Jesus was his own thing, his own person? Like one of the prophets of old. Like one of the prophets of old. Old age. Okay, verse 16 says, when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. This is the point of resonance for Herod. He knows he cut off John's head, and he knows it was wrong. So, if this really is John come back to life, then Herod would be terrified of John's anger and retribution. He's come to get revenge. He's after me. Well, maybe the king, but what chance have I got against somebody that's resurrected? Somebody that's got power over death. And then we start to get this backstory. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John. Herod, what kind of a king are you anyway? Doing what your wife tells you to do, allowing yourself to be manipulated in this way. Verse 17. Now we get the back story and find out why. Herod is scared. And what exactly happened? Everything's in verse 17. Massive explanation. Well, condensed explanation. It was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. It's a very compact sentence, but there's an incredible amount compacted into that sentence. So Herod was the one who gave the order to have John arrested and put in prison. Honestly, when I'm typing these things out, all I'm doing is taking what's already there, putting it into my own words, and that seems a bit pointless, but it helps, because if you just look at a little part of a sentence, suddenly you think, yeah, but what's that mean? What's that saying? And you can see what it's saying, but once you've typed it out, once you've expressed it, it's clearer in your mind. And particularly when you've got a verse like this where there's so much information contained within a tiny, simple sentence that says, For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. There's just so much in that. You just got to break it down. So it was Herod was the one who gave the order to have Jesus arrested and put in prison. It's interesting. Sent. He had sent. The word is apostello. Yeah. He sent out his apostle to arrest John. Apostle means messenger. One who's sent to do a job. He did it for Herodias. So Herod didn't want to arrest John himself. He was under Herodias's thumb. As a king, you would expect him to be really powerful. But he's allowing himself to be controlled by his wife. Herodias wasn't originally his wife. She was married to his brother Philip, but we don't know from here what's happened to Philip. Is he alive? Is he dead? Is he in prison? Or is he still living there? That'd be terrible if he was still around. Is he alive or dead? In exile or prison? Or is he still around? Having to watch his wife and brother humiliate him. Herod on steroid. So here we are. Here was the problem. John was calling Herod out for marrying his brother's wife. He said it was against the law. Even the king needs to keep the law if we're talking about God's law. So Herod, he's really powerless, isn't he? Throughout this story, he really doesn't come across as somebody who's got any kind of kingly power at all. He's arresting John because of Herodias. John is telling him he's not obeying the law of God, and then he ends up beheading John because of the daughter of Herodias. So, The issue with John is to do with Herodias. She doesn't like being called out for wrong behaviour. So what about Herod? Does he mind? Does he not mind it? Is he? What's he going to do about it? Was he actually thinking of divorcing? At 11 o'clock. Sorry about that. Brief interruption. So the issue with John is to do with Herodias. She doesn't like being called out for wrong behaviour. So yeah. So what about Herod? How does he actually feel about his wrongdoing being exposed by this creature? Yeah, I suppose that's what the next verse is about, isn't it? Herodias hated it so much she wanted John dead, but did not have the power. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? There's so much about power and authority in this book. It starts off by talking about Jesus, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who comes in and he preaches that the kingdom of God is near. And he's basically teaching that he is the king. And he gradually goes through kind of giving authority, showing his authority, and we've seen that in these big miracles that he performed of calming the storm and clearing out the demons and healing a girl, a woman that's bleeding and a girl that's died, just demonstrating that he just needs to speak. He's got authority. Now we come to Herod, and it couldn't be more of a contrast. This is a man who has no authority, no power, despite on the face of it having the trappings of authority and power. So, just in the overview, having established that Jesus has authority, we see a contrast with Herod, who seems powerless. And even Herodias, she's behaving because she's not got the power, she's not got the authority. She wants him dead, but she can't get it. She wants what she wants, and she'll silence the man that will oppose her. So what we're on verse 20. Verse 20, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. He kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. It's a fascinating look at Herod's mind. How he reacted to John. He feared him. What do we mean by fear? Phobia, Phoebe. To frighten. Afraid, terrified, phobos. To be in awe of, to be, He's terrified and in awe of John, which means that he probably recognizes that John is from God. He knows John is righteous. And holy, which means he probably recognizes that he is his own unrighteousness. And yet he kept John safe. Why would he do that? Why would he allow and even protect the one who is pointing out his sin? When he listened to John, he was greatly perplexed, which is when Herod heard him, he was greatly puzzled in the NIV, yet he liked to listen to him. Greatly perplexed in the ESV. Perplexed. Aporeo. Perplexed, uncertain, lost. Aporeo. What's that one? To be at loss, to be perplexed. Doesn't know what to make of him. He didn't know what to make of John. So why not? Yet he gladly listened to what John had to say. Sometimes people like being told the truth, even though it hurts. I think I'm going to need to finish at that point. I hope that what I've been looking at is helpful in a little way. Sorry about the interruptions, but I think I might need to go and deal with something now. So hope that's helpful. Yeah, maybe I'll do a little brief video later in the week, not a live stream, but a video later in the week looking at something else. But keep tuned and keep looking out for that. And I'll see you again sometime. Alright,